I hope that you're enjoying the lovely summer weather, or as those on the left call it, the end of all humanity through climate change, which everything bad that happens is a result of, you guessed it, climate change. Ooh. We're joined by Gabriella Hoffman of the IWF. That is, of course, the Independent Women's Forum, who has sent over a couple of things I didn't even know they were blaming on the Republican governors moving their states away from the climate change nonsense. Gabby, good evening.
Good to talk to you, Tony. Thanks for having me back on. Yes, there's a lot to deconstruct with all this. And it's interesting, we've seen critics of Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, say that he's discouraging the mention of certain phrases. Now they're saying that he wants to institute a policy of saying, don't say climate change. And so it's par for the course that there's a lot of this overreaction to typical tropic weather that is occurring in Florida. It's summer, it's hurricane season, so this is only to be expected.
Oh, wait, well, tropical weather. What kind of tropical weather is Florida experiencing? For those of us in the Midwestern heartland who only experience cornfields, thunderstorms, and tornadoes.
There's torrential downpour, there's flooding, there's a lot of rainfall. If you've traveled to Florida in the summer, it's not the most ideal time to go there, but I've done it a little bit. And in the times that I've gone, anecdotally for your listeners, oftentimes it's really hot in the morning and then it's followed by, thunderstorms, rainstorms, lots of downpour in the afternoon to kind of balance. So this is typical.
I hear the anecdotal part there, and I'm a former teacher. I enjoy anecdotal evidence as much as the next guy, but I pulled up a few statistics here for you, and it looks like so far this year, Florida's rainfall is actually slightly below average. Mm-hmm. Shocking stuff. And yes, to throw the anecdotes in there as well, I have enjoyed this Florida sunrise before the afternoon 12 noon to 12:05 thunderstorm, the 12:15 to 12:30 thunderstorm, and then the 105 to 118 thunderstorm, and so on. Yeah. That's just Florida. Like, that's what it's known for. But this is Ron DeSantis invoking climate change, is it? That sounds kind of like wizardry.
Well, it's him forbidding the notion of even mentioning it, according to some of the very animated weathermen in Florida and people who are piling on. And so they think that he has the power to control the weather. And I don't think any politician does.
Oh, well, I'm used to that being an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. I didn't know that Governor Ron DeSantis, the former JAG, that's clearly something that he's messing with. Christina Pushaw put this out as well on June 13th. A heavy rain and flooding in Miami is not a new phenomenon. Look, Noah, land. Like, this kind of stuff's been going on for quite a while. Not every single piece of weather is evidence of climate change. Oh, it's so tiresome.
Not even a slither of even being in a so-called crisis. I think I had mentioned this to you earlier, but anytime I do these type of appearances, it's important to note that climate disasters, natural disasters, and deaths that result from that are down historically 90 some odd percent. So we see fewer instances of these very apoplectic kind of anticlimactic events occurring. And it's a tragedy whenever these natural disasters occur.
Absolutely.
But the problem is the media is overhyping the frequency with which these high intensity events are occurring. So thankfully, there are lots of good people who are honest brokers in the climate space who are saying we're actually seeing fewer tornadoes, hurricanes, high intensity weather patterns. And another person that you should, profile a little bit more is a meteorology student, Chris Martz. And he was saying, and similarly to Christina Pushaw, and she elevated some of his stuff too, that he posted a contrasting and comparing picture of Miami, from 100 years ago to present day, and said that the way to mitigate these sort of coastal events is for people to be mindful, in terms of building codes and to recognize, how to mitigate flooding. It's not so much responding to with these really exhaustive, big, wide sweeping climate policies, which will do nothing to mitigate, coastal problems or flooding, but it's just more money being funneled to this virtue signaling of fighting a climate crisis, so to speak, and not do much. And if we're living in a climate crisis, these people who are suggesting it do not believe and live like it themselves. Why are they buying up coastal property still? They don't want us to own coastal property, but it's for them, it's okay.
Well,
to
again,
have coastal property.
I'm a huge fan of the idea that apparently the oceans are all rising steadily and all of the coasts are going to disappear. But, you actually look at the very earliest photos that we have of these coastlines, and then you look at them side by side with land today, and it's the same. And at high tide and at low tide, it's the same. And so I'm not really seeing the alarmism. They say, yeah, well, in the Sahara Desert, it was really hot this week. Yeah, it's the Sahara Desert.
Water is wet.
Did you not?
It's like saying water is wet.
Did you not watch the National Geographic videos in elementary school when you were a kid? That's kind of known for being a hot place. Like, get out of here.
Yeah, subtropical climate like Florida is supposed to have rainfall. They'll clamor and complain if there's a heat wave in Florida, and when it comes to like recent droughts that have been experienced there a couple of years ago, they were saying it's catastrophic climate change, but it's pretty cyclical and it happens. And the farmers and ranchers I spoke to who are adversely affected by this, they have to, account for resiliency and mitigation, and they largely do, their part to ensure that their crops or their livestock aren't destroyed. So they'll complain if there's flooding, they'll complain if there's drought, they'll complain if there's a heat wave. But this is pretty typical of Florida. So not surprising they're making it political, pinning the blame on Ron DeSantis for banning don't say climate change or for the appearance of supposedly not saying climate change. Nobody's preventing you from saying that. He's just saying we're not going to have these obtuse climate policies dictate our weather reports. A really sensible, reasonable policy to have, because not everything is anticlimactic. Not everything is a crisis. And he doesn't want to terrify his constituents, because when you have these natural disasters, if you put in more panic and more alarmism, you're going to make people even more deathly afraid of how to respond to these kind of weather patterns and weather events.
That's
so
really
why
good.
would he want to add fuel to the fire there?
That's a really good turn of phrase there, that this climatic crisis has rather become anticlimactic. So those things all considered, now we go over to how the Biden administration is handling the climate crisis. And on the show a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this pretty extensively, that Pete Buttigieg, who was given $5 billion to build electric vehicle charging station around the country, had ended up building about 7 or 8 electric vehicle charging not like charging stations as in entire buildings, but charging stations as in the single charging entity. The total cost, by the way, which should have taken about $300,000 to build, so we should have like 4.997 billion lying around, but don't hold your breath. Well, according to Joe Gabriel Simonson over at the Free Beacon, there's a new report this morning, 2 days ago, that said that the reason that these infrastructure projects and these electric vehicle chargers aren't getting built is because senior officials in the Department of Transportation say the White House's equity requirements for infrastructure projects have forestalled this construction. So DEI strikes again, Gab. What are we going to do?
Well, this is a classic case of environmentalists cannibalizing themselves. They have these very ambitious goals, and they want to chart a net zero course. They want to make the economy net zero by 2050, but thankfully those predictions will never pan out. A lot of these very ambitious predictions sound really nice and wonderful, but they are not even realistic. And obviously you're alluding to the fact that they've only built 7 or 8 publicly funded charging stations, and that equity is really keeping this plan down. It is so laughable. But this is an unfortunate thing, because you'll never have any true progress or advancements in mitigating actual crises or problems or onboarding different, energy projects. Permitting reform, according to a new finalized rule, has been bogged down by this equity, environmental justice, indigenous knowledge component.
Yeah, what a surprise, because you need everyone's permission. And so I've looked at some of these reports, and it's really quite great. So the argument is they want to go out and build some electrical vehicle charging stations. And the easiest places to build those are on state or federally owned rest stops along Midwestern states, along the interstates, because they already have the land. Very easy infrastructure to install. Presto, bada bing, bada boom, stations up in like 2 weeks. But the problem is that's not equitable, because there's too many white people that are living along the interstates in Midwestern states or whatever. Again, according to the arguments that are made here, they want to put them in inner city areas, but there's no land, there's no permits. The inner city areas don't want them. The copper lines, I don't know if you saw this from California, the actual charging cables sticking out of the charging things are getting stolen because they have copper in them. So a bunch of tweakers are running up. Yeah, again, in the Midwest, they're tweakers fueling the meth habit. On the coasts, it may be a different drug habit that's being fueled to steal the copper. And there's this like weird equity. Well, we have to put them here, but we don't have the land, but we can't put them over here. And like you said, it's self-cannibalizing, and it's so ironic in a way, but just from over here, honestly, it cracks me up. I mean, Ben Carson was predicting this, by the way. Secretary Ben Carson was predicting this like 10 years ago, that this is where this was going to end up.
It's not surprising to see this ESG DEI matrix, especially in the energy space, crumble. And I've called for, obviously for them to pull the plug here. They're not going to listen to individuals like me, but the market is not favoring EV catalyzation. And this insistence that government installing these charging stations in these Midwestern states or coastal states or what have you is not a motivator for people to buy EVs either.
Right.
A report came out today or yesterday that said that 40% of EV buyers have buyer's remorse, no pun intended, and they want to go back to a gas-powered car because of just the inefficiencies, the range issues, the charging concerns, and also buying a car that has a lot of these unknowns in terms of who is sourcing, what type of labor force is sourcing these cars to, and also the environmental unknowns. These cars might be actually worse for the environment than your gas-powered car. And so it's not surprising to see this equity component bog down these policies. And, maybe we want it to happen like this, where it's self-defeating and we see them, like I said, cannibalizing themselves here, because these policies will never be online. They will never come to fruition, because throwing money at a problem and interfering with the markets is going to distort them. It's going to distort consumer interest. And we're seeing this agenda fall flat, of course, and not surprising to see equity maybe be the death knell from which, EV catalyzation goes away. I think we should actually celebrate this in the one rare instance where their own self-defeating agendas and extreme agendas might actually lead to the ruin and decimation of these policies. So they're doing our work for us here.
I think that's pretty well said. Gabriella Hoffman over at the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you very much for taking a few minutes to join us. You can follow her at Gabby_Hoffman over on X. She is the director of the Center for Energy and Conservation over at the IWF. Gabby, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tony, for having me on. It's a pleasure as always.